technique, you do like behavioral activation as a cognitive behavioral therapy technique, or you use other techniques, you can then get better, feel better, okay? But we're not going to then discuss how you got in the abusive relationship, or if you've had abusive relationships all your life, why this is. Why do you find yourself in this position?
So what type of therapy is the right therapy then?
Well, then there's different types of other therapies, but the point that is more basic that I'm trying to make is that then if you have a type of therapy, whether it's systemic therapy, kind of focusing on your family, on your relations generally, or psychodynamic therapy, focusing on your inner struggles, right? Let's say that these types of therapy, or any other type of therapy, takes more time to make you feel better, then chances are services will think, okay, but look, for this disorder, depression, right, the best therapy is CBT, so cognitive behavioral therapy, because you learn these techniques, you apply them, and you feel much better, much quicker than if you had gone down another route. But then, and here, coming back to what I was saying before, the fact that the criteria for success, the criteria for recovery or improvement is that symptom is gone, that person is not unhappy anymore, that becomes a questionable criteria then, because I would have rather advocated for this person not to have a pill or some techniques that make the depression go as quickly as possible. I would have worked with those feelings, with that state of suffering, to try and give meaning to this experience within the context of the person's life.
Sure.
So this is wide implications, of course, when you talk to people and you are a worker subject to a service that doesn't understand this or doesn't value this. And so this is why it's important, I think, for people, once again, to have a look at our previous episodes, because we're starting to see now, I think, how all of these different aspects kind of start coming together. So you have your top-down structure where you're told to follow best practice. And best practice is that you need to have an evidence-based approach. And the evidence-based approach is you need to use a technique that makes the anxiety or the sadness go away. And you're doing, and the consequence of this is that you start going in circles. So the person whom you might not even know is in an abusive relationship because you don't have an interest to explore the reasons why the person suffers. The person takes the pill or learns the technique.
Well, they haven't come to you with that problem.
Not necessarily. Yeah. They might have just said, "I feel low. I don't know why." No, yeah. And there's a tendency for services to say, "Well, who cares why?" You know. The important thing is that we get this depression over with. Well, what's the point? It takes much longer if you need to know why things have happened. So the danger is that the person gets better, meaning that they feel better, they take their medication, they do their techniques, and then a few months later they get re-referred to the service for another problem that seems completely unrelated. So, I started feeling really, anxious about something, right? And say, but this is a completely different disorder. So this is not depression anymore. So here we have this other set of techniques for this disorder, and this other medication that works well with this other disorder. And you start kind of putting patches everywhere to try and stop these individual symptoms without
connecting it to
everything to the bigger picture. It's similar to the risk management culture that we spoke about in the previous episode. So when you miss the ramification and the complexity of things, ultimately you go around in circles and you do a disservice to the person. Now, I'm not saying that there's that I have a simple
solution. It's
solution
not about
to
simple
this.
solutions.
It's
though.
not. It's the opposite of simplification. So, unfortunately or fortunately, this field, mental health, psychology, supporting people, is a rather complex field. Like other fields, like like heart surgery is complex. So we need to find an approach that captures this complexity. Now, part of this complexity is, for example, that it's not necessarily a bad thing to focus on symptoms. So there is a scope. So like CBT therapists don't hate me because I'm not against CBT. CBT, maybe I didn't explain this well enough, but CBT stands for cognitive behavioral therapy. So it is specifically kind of tailored at working on symptoms and not on the underlying causes of them. So work on anxiety, work on depression, and teach people techniques that they can work with in terms of basically looking at how behaviors, thoughts, and physical sensations and emotions are kind of interconnected. So acting on your behavior, acting on your thoughts, you can affect all of the other aspects, but never really looking at the conflicts that stem from the past that affect your current behavior, that affect the way you feel. So focusing on that specific symptom, that's the goal of the therapy, to make ultimately your score on a specific disorder go down. Yeah. So there's a scope for that. So, for example, if I say, well, look, I have a wedding I need to go to in Australia next year, and and I live in Britain, and that means I'll have to take a plane, and I'm scared of flying. Then immediately I would think, okay, well, here we need to help you with some, giving you some tools, techniques so that you can get on that plane ultimately. Yeah. It wouldn't be the best approach to go down another route. Okay?
How do you mean?
Like it wouldn't be since your focus is trying to get on that plane to go to your wedding, to this wedding in Australia. Yes, you could start going down another route, looking for another therapy, but that's not what this person is looking for. This person is not interested in another type of work. Okay, so I'm not saying that then we should go the other route. We should say, oh no, we should not do anything related to symptoms. We should try to focus on something else, always on the meaning behind things. Or we should never give medication to people because that's just focusing on symptoms. Because sometimes symptoms are really difficult and almost impossible to live with. And so then that can help.
So it has value.
So it has value. Now, as I said at the beginning of the episode, the fact that something is evidence-based is not something that I'm against. So even if you don't go down a route where you're having a diversification of the type of treatments you offer to people, then you need to find a way to. I think there's a scope and there's a lot of merit in trying to make that evidence based, but your indicators need to be different. So, for example, if you're using if you start saying that the well-being of a person is not measured by remission of symptoms, you could define well-being in another way. You could say the extent to which a person is able to understand their circumstances. That treatment is evidence-based, right? Then you would need to define how exactly would you measure this. Is complicated, but just talking about the principle in general.
Why do you need to be able to measure it as well?
You would need to have specific indicators. So with symptoms, it's very easy. You have a scale of for depression, a scale for anxiety, and you have your score at the end of as an outcome of that scale, and you say, oh, look, we have this amount of people at the beginning of the treatment, their scores were really high. At the end of this treatment, their scores have significantly reduced on a scale of anxiety, on a scale of depression. But if you're not focusing anymore, or you decide, I don't want to focus on symptoms, I want to focus on the overall meaning of the experience that the person is going through. I want to see how better this person gets in a different way. Then you will need to define this. So what do you mean? It's called in research a dependent variable. So kind of what is your measure of the fact that there's been an improvement in a treatment? So, of course, you will need to think about it when you say, well, somebody knows themselves better. You will need to think, how do you measure that somebody has known themselves better now?
Yeah.
And what does that mean? So it's complex. You will need to think about it. But the general principle that I think is valid to make is that if you had this a different approach to measuring evidence, you would have a completely different recommendation in terms of what evidence-based practice is. So you would say, okay, this person feels really low. The evidence-based practice is the one that makes the person understand their circumstances better. And you would not go down a CBT route. You would have a recommendation for another type of treatment. Now,
But how would you know that which route was the right route to go down?
so good question. So this then brings us to another step, which is, how do you make that decision? And that decision, unfortunately, is a political decision.
Why?
Because it's about what you think is important in life. Some people think that being happy, smiling, having a good job, and never thinking about anything about the meaning of their life or how did I get here? Is this something I really want? Do I really want to have a job that I make a huge amount of money?
Sure.
Not talking about myself here, Matt.
No. You have me deceived.
Do I really want all of this money? Do I really want these fancy cars and or is something missing here? Some people might think this is not what I want for this person that is depressed. I don't want this person to become somebody who doesn't question anything. It just becomes.
Sorry, so are you talking about the therapists projecting their own, what they want from their life onto the client?
No, I'm talking about the wider service and system trying to treat people
in the view of what society thinks is a good life.
So, for example, a lot of services kind of have a lot of emphasis on employment.
Right.
So we
because employment is deemed to be like a good thing.
Yeah. I'm not saying that's a bad thing.
Yeah.
Okay, don't get me wrong. But a lot of services think, okay, the goal here is to get people into employment.
Sure.
But I don't know that the goal of treatment when somebody's feeling low and it's not working, the priority shouldn't necessarily be going back into this social machinery of human exploitation in a way,
Sure.
in some way, because then we need to see how meaningful then is employment nowadays in many ways. So
big question.
So it's a big question, and the moment you're told, well, you need to work in an evidence-based way, and this treatment works better. This way of working is better because more people get into employment with this treatment than with this other treatment. You're making a political point there, and in general, when people make political points in the wider society in politics,
political because it's pursuing employment. Or,
because it's
making a choice to pursue employment.
Or because it's saying that the goal is to make the symptom vanish as well. It's kind of a life choice. So you're saying we want everything to look good.
Yeah.
We're not really interested if then you're in your family, you're in an abusive relationship, for example. But as long as you smile, that's fine. So I think in a lot of countries, maybe not so much in Britain, but there's political parties that are really strongly in favor of traditional families, for example.
Yeah.
And then maybe their own, look at the families of certain politicians that are strongly in favor of